Donkey Kong comes to Nintendo's rescue. Software retailing is coming to a mall near you. And Computer Chronicles brings tech to TV. These stories and many more on this episode of the Video Game Newsroom Time Machine.
I've been waiting a long time for a chance to say this. Stop the presses.
Requiescat in pace.
Makes him crazy, man. What is a man?
It's me, Mario.
What a mess.
Get over here!
Please save me.
Welcome back to another episode of the Video Game Newsroom Time Machine, the show where we travel back in time 40, 30, or 20 years to find out what was making headlines in the video game and home computer world. Today we're going to be traveling back 40 years to September of 1981. But before we do that, my name is Carl, and this is my intrepid co-host for this journey, Mads. Say hi, Mads.
Hi, Mads. It's me.
Excellent. I'm back. You're back. You're back.
Yes.
So, what you been up to since we talked last month?
So, I wanted to talk about what I've been up to today, because today Ethan made me so happy, because I finally got to listen to the episode that was after the first episode I was on. And Ethan not only sings for me, he actually plays a bit of guitar for me. And I just like to say, has he ever played guitar for Peter before?
No, he has never played a guitar for Peter before.
Well, Peter, he's never played guitar for you before. I'm just saying that. So that really made my day. That made my day. I was just laughing along to my washing up in the kitchen. So beautifully done, mate.
He completely surprised me with that as well. I did not know he had a guitar. We always chat before the recording with video on, and then we turn the video off for the recording. And he purposely kept the guitar outside the view of the camera so I wouldn't know it was coming when it came.
Brilliant.
Yeah, all hats off. Ethan went above and beyond the Call of Duty on that one.
Oh yes, that was great. Apart from that, I haven't been up to much. Really, been far too busy with the life and work, and so yeah. Oh well, playing a bit of. I've been playing a bit of Burger Time, the arcade game Burger Time recently. Yeah, and really enjoying that. But that's pretty much the only gaming I've been getting into.
What brought that on?
So it's the 2 months, the summer of RPG in the game club on the Retro Asylum Discord. And that means we are playing an RPG for 2 months. And a lot of people don't really like RPGs or like diving into huge games like that. So we always, when we're 1 month in, we introduce a classic arcade game challenge, like a high score challenge for our listeners. And I have to say, some of these guys who have dived into Burger Time are crazy good. The guy who has the top score on our forums or on Discord right now, his score is 39.2 times larger than mine. So the best thing I can do, and then you times that with the 39. Yeah, they are really good.
And Burger Time is one of those games that is just devilishly difficult.
Yeah, that's how I feel about it. But these guys who are, he's actually looping it now, and he says that once you figure out the patterns, it's very doable. But man, I can get to level 3, and then it's an instant death. No matter how many lives I have left when I get there, I'm going to be dead in 5 seconds. So,
wow, I can guess it's probably something akin to Pac-Man, where each of the ghosts has a specific AI routine, if you want to call it that. And once you figure those out, it's very predictable what's going to happen with each move. I can imagine that that's the way with the opponents in Burger Time as well.
It's definitely something along those lines. I think maybe it's even simpler than Pac-Man. Maybe they only have one AI. I mean, they seem to be homing into you, but whenever when they walk like horizontally and they meet a ladder, they want to climb up or down it. So there's something there. Yeah, there's some rules as to how they play. They walk towards you, but they want to, whenever they get off a ladder, they want to get onto another one. So you can hurt them somehow, I think.
Okay, cool. That would be, I mean, there's got to be a pattern. And let's face it, this is an early 80s arcade game, and it's running off of cassette system. So it's not what you'd say called the most complicated AI routine in the world. There's got to be a trick to it. But
Probably. I'm off the back of my mind. I think it's an 82 game, so you'll be over this soon.
yeah, and it's using the Data East cassette system, which has already been introduced in 81. Yeah, it's one of the few games for that system that really anybody remembers. Most of them were pretty forgettable.
Yeah.
But the Deco
I always
system.
loved Burger Time. Played it a lot on my C64. So, but I haven't picked up the C64 version again this time around. But I feel that it must be easier because I'm really getting my ass handed to me here on the arcade version. So
I'm trying to remember what the C64 version was like. I know I played it back in the day. But yeah, I think it is simplified. There's elements missing, or the burger isn't as tall or something, because they also squatted it out, similar to the way that they squatted
that makes
out
sense because
Donkey
it is,
Kong.
of course, a vertical game. So it makes sense that they would have made it, not that many layers or stories or whatever you want to call them.
Exactly. Okay. Oh, that's cool. I wish I could say I've been playing something, and I literally have not played anything because I'm trying to use my time right now to build up a backlog of episodes. And I have literally been spending like 4 hours a day just researching for the show. So my brain is slowly turning into mush, but I have a whole bunch of really cool interviews coming up. So that's and I got to interview one of my all-time personal heroes. So that's
can you
it's an interview that's coming up in several months.
Okay.
Damon Sly, co-founder of Dynamics and lead designer of my favorite game of all time, Project Firestart.
Okay.
So yeah,
Great
and
stuff.
I had enough self-awareness to not record the approximately 30 minutes of me basically gushing over his game design, and he's just staring at me like, seriously, that game? And I was like, yes, that game. But yeah, he actually told me how the project came about and so forth. Very, very interesting stuff, and how Dynamics worked internally. And it's going to be a really good interview. But again, it's like there's like 4 more before that comes out. So
yeah, I do love Project Firestart. We need to get that on the game club at our Retro Asylum at some point, and then get you on board for recording the episode.
Definitely, dude. I am sadly obsessed with that game. I mean, not sadly. It's just a game that has stuck with me. But okay, I think that's enough banter. People are not here to listen to us talk about our personal lives, no matter how
I bet some of them are.
Yeah, that's. I really should do a poll. How many people actually stop the episode after the banter section? There's got to be some people out there who do that. But oh well. We need to, before we turn on the time machine, we need to do one very important segment of the show. As always, we are always using the cover dates of magazines and newspapers to give us the date of September 1981, which always means that the stories actually happened at some point before that. And one of the traditions here is always to have the co-host play one of the games that was reviewed in a publication dated September 1981. Remember, everybody, it's just a framing device. But to play one of those games that they have never played before. And this month, Mads, you are playing the Muse Classic, co-designed by Ed Zarin and programmed by the great late Silas Warner. Castle Wolfenstein. Are you ready?
Ready as I will be.
Excellent. Then let's delve in to Castle Wolfenstein on the Apple II. Mads, welcome back from your 7 minutes in heaven. Now, based off of the time you spent in there, how would you describe Castle Wolfenstein?
So how would I describe it? Castle Wolfenstein is a top-down action game where you try, action adventure game really, where you try to escape Castle Wolfenstein. You are a foreign soldier, not a German soldier. Not actually sure whether you're a UK or US soldier, but you're trying to get out of Castle Wolfenstein. And initially, all the guards are trying to kill you, but you can find different stuff, like find a uniform to put on so you can sneak around. Nobody will be after you. And I'm actually unsure of what the goals of the entire game is. I found some war plans at some point, which I think probably may be the goal, getting those out of Castle Wolfenstein. But apart from that, I'm not sure what I was doing. It was a great game. It was a game that just took 5 minutes to get used to the controls of. So I died all the time the first 5 minutes, but after that, it's a really enjoyable game, and something you should try if you have an Apple II, I think.
What was awkward about the controls at first?
So for me, the most awkward thing was that it was like an on-off control. If you pressed right, the character would be moving right all the time until you pressed a stop key. So it wasn't holding down a button to go right. It was pressing a button once, and then he'll go right until you press stop again. And whenever I hit a wall, which I do constantly, of course, because these controls were bugging me a bit, the entire screen would flash. I'm not sure whether that was a fault in the ROM I was using, the disk image, or what. But that made it a bit difficult to control initially, but once you get used to it, it actually works. Serviceable.
Cool. Now, this is set in World War II. You're moving around. Now, this game was Muse's attempt to recreate the gameplay of Berserk. Have you ever played Berserk?
Yeah. This was definitely. I mean, you control the directions with one set of keys, 4 keys, and then a stop key, and then you control the direction you're pointing your gun with another set of keys, and you have a fire key as well. So this would be perfect for a twin stick shooter, really. These controls. So actually updating it and playing it today on a twin stick controller with a button mapped for search, a button mapped for throwing grenades, and a button map for use, and then the 2 sticks for, a button for fire as well, of course, and then the 2 sticks for controlling where you're pointing the gun, where you're moving, would work really well.
Well, I mean, and when you think about it, this is obviously the inspiration for, in some aspects, obviously not for the game engine, but it is the inspiration for the scenario of Wolfenstein 3D.
Yeah.
It later on goes and it buys the rights to this. Muse was already long gone, and they got it out of whoever bought the rights from the bankruptcy court. But when you think about how you move around in Wolfenstein 3D, with the sidestepping and the moving backwards while shooting forwards and stuff, it almost feels like you understand where they're coming from with this, because in this game you can also essentially do side steps around a corner, then you move out, shoot upward, and stuff. So a lot of that sort of stealthy movement through the space to catch people and to kill enemies and so forth really does get replicated in Wolfenstein 3D.
Yeah, makes total sense.
Yeah, I mean,
and, as we were talking about on the video version that you can see if you're a patron of this wonderful show.
Thank you for the
it
plug.
Made fun use of the German language as well in many ways. but that will be for the patrons.
Yeah, the sound samples on this are amusing. That's a nice way of putting it.
Yes.
The sound samples are amusing. I don't know how well you're going to be able to hear them on the Patreon video. Obviously, it's great because our commentary there is very different from our commentary here, and you should go there and support the show. Blah blah blah. But there's. I'll put a link to some video of all the sound samples from the game because it is quite amusing. And when I talked to Ed Zarin, the co-developer of the game, together with Silas Warner, they had a lot of fun with this. It wasn't really meant to be too serious, quote unquote.
No, it's a great game. Great little stealth arcade shoot 'em up, whatever you want to call it. It's a bit of an adventure as well. It's a good game.
Cool. Okay, then I'm glad that this was not the catastrophically horrible experience that Champion of the Raj was.
No, but I'd just like to say on that note, mate, I get to play on the great Amiga Champions of Raj, but Peter, he gets to play Hunter. What's up with that?
It just happened to be a game that was reviewed that month, and I knew you had already played Hunter. So I couldn't give you Hunter. I had to give you a game that you, with your massive breadth of experience of games of this time period, had not played. And so that meant I had to really, really, really dig deep and scrape the lowest level of algae off the bottom of the pool.
And there was Champions of the Raj. Yes, makes sense. Makes complete sense. Let's move on, mate.
Oh, yeah, you're going to be so jealous because he's doing the next episode after this one, and he gets to play Megalomania.
Oh, that is my favorite strategy game ever, mate. I love Megalomania. I'm really looking forward to hearing what his opinion of that is.
I'm looking forward to figuring out just how his nerves will be racked by everything moving around on screen at once. So Megalomania
actually had tech trees before Civilization was even released.
Before it was released, but all the magazines are already. Well, it's weird because the U.S. magazines that month are already running full page ads for Civ.
Okay.
So, and Civ is coming out for that Christmas as well. So it's really, the idea is in the air. It's just fun to see two completely different developers with very different approaches to games implementing the same idea. And the tech tree thing existed in board games before that.
Yeah. Okay.
But just implementing that same idea of the evolution of a civilization in conflict with other civilizations on the same map.
Yeah.
And just doing it completely differently.
As much as I love Civilization, and I really do love Civilization, Megalomania just beats it for me because it's more bite-sized missions. I mean, you can have a game of an hour and get through 5 missions and save there, whereas one game of Civilization will take you 15 hours, and then you may or may not win. But Megalomania, you can, and the whole thing about using as few troops as possible because the troops you save then carry on to the next levels, the next worlds, epochs, as it's called in Megalomania. That's brilliant.
Yeah, and I mean, you can see sort of the proto DNA of cannon fodder in that aspect.
Yeah.
And Sensible Software, I mean, this was the height of their power. This was, Megalomania is the beginning of their great period.
Yeah,
I mean, they did wonderful things
of course,
before that.
The little people running around in Megalomania are the people running around in Sensible Soccer, because at some point they were just playing around. I think John Hare was playing around with putting some soccer clothes on them, football clothes on them, and then they made a football game.
Yeah, and then they made Cannon Fodder, and then
which is another brilliant game.
Yeah, it was a wonderful studio that unfortunately did not transition fast enough off of the Amiga.
No.
But oh well. Okay,
drugs and rock and roll were their fate.
We are still 10 years too soon for that discussion. And before we can turn on the time machine, we have one more bit of business. You've mentioned him already. Our good friend Ethan Johnson of the History of How We Play is the leader, the head, the seer of all things true and honest in a little section we call the Department of Corrections. Welcome back to the Department of Corrections, Ethan. So, before we find out what I messed up in August of 1981, we have the obligatory...
I don't appreciate the obligatory comment, but because it is the Mads comment, he gets a little song with it. Oh, yeah. Oh, well, thank you, Mads, for coming on the show. What I gotta say, I don't know. Okay, that's it.
So basically, you're saying that he has to come on at least 4 or 5 more times before you have at least the semblance of a tune.
Well, a little boogie woogie for you.
I dig it.
All right. Okay, so Department of Corrections time. We've moved into a new building. If you didn't hear the last one, the rest has been put aside. So we're putting aside the past, and now we're bringing up the past again. Because, Carl, you cannot keep out of trouble. You just have an endless docket of information.
Yes.
So, first of all, asking the question of what the woman in Donkey Kong was called initially, the character was purely known as the Lady in the beginning. And we were looking for when she was first called Pauline, but didn't dig up that information. It is such a minor point. I don't care that much. So if somebody wants to look it up, go ahead.
There you go.
Next up, you were giving a shout out to Gaming Alexandria, but there was false information, so I have to correct here. You're talking about the General Leighton Davis, his talk about an electronic war game, and that was not on our website. It is something that I just found searching in newspapers. Basically, and Mads was like, how did you find it? Just searching in the Omaha World Herald? No, Mads. There are these things called search engines nowadays. Maybe you haven't caught up yet, but but I was searching either for the term electronic game or computer game, and
gotcha.
just going down that route, I have found a lot of interesting stuff that's never been remarked on before. Not a lot of super important stuff, but just stuff that if you wanted to be a scholar of kind of, how computers get adopted in society, I'm putting that into my Zotero file. So eventually, if you are a scholar of this sort of thing, reach out.
Excellent. And I reached out and I got this information from you, and I will continue to do so in the future.
Yeah, I don't count the thing there, Leighton Davis's one, as a video game because it's not digital. It was run on an analog computer. But, if you're just looking broadly at electronic games and kind of the military context, it would be interesting to dig more up on, but some other people I know who have looked into it haven't been able to discern a lot of specifics.
Yeah, the only lead I found, other than the Time Magazine article as well, but the only lead I found was a potential son of Leighton Davis, but I haven't been able to confirm that it's actually his son. And I probably should try to reach out and see if he's got anything on it, but that's, the only thing I could find.
So, continuing research, on and on.
Yes.
Next up, we are into Plato. Yes, good old Plato. And you were wondering if it had a bitmap screen, but bitmap screens hadn't been invented yet because they were too memory intensive. So at the time, Plato 1, which I'm not 100% certain if it had a screen. I know Plato 2 did, but they would have been using either a point plotting or vector display.
Yeah, I think I found something that the first one had a screen, but with no description of what the nature of the screen was.
Yeah, there is a photo of Plato 2 that has like a terminal that they built for it that shows like some shapes that are very clearly vector.
Gotcha. Okay, so that would be interesting to get confirmation at some point, but yeah.
And next up, another old computer talking about Eniac. And you're probably right to say that the Eniac creators weren't rich, but the people who held the patent probably were, because there's this whole big thing about Eniac that they filed some patents when they did it, and all computer makers had to pay into that, basically. I don't know the full parameters of the patent, but there's a whole book about the litigation that revolves around this experimental digital computer that John Mauchly may have seen called the Adanasoff-Berry computer. retroactively. But those are Atanasov. If you look him up, then you will find this. There's a documentary that's on YouTube, and then there's a book as well that talks about this.
Oh, cool. Okay. That the fact that there's litigation on it actually sounds interesting. And I'd love to dive into it, but I'm guessing that most of those patents expired way before home computers were a thing.
Yeah, because those are filed in the 40s. Even by the time that the litigation was taking place, I think the patents had already expired, but they were suing over, damages that had been accrued from before the expiry of the patent. So yeah, that it's an interesting story, if perhaps a little bit overplayed as to its importance. But if you want to learn about early digital computers, look up the Atanasov-Berry computer.
Gotcha.
Into the future of 1981, August of 1981. So when you're saying that Namco didn't they weren't working on a sequel to Pac-Man at the time that they were brought Miss Pac-Man, but that's not true. Like, they were working on Super Pac-Man, and even I'm forgetting the name of this game. It didn't wind up being a Pac-Man game, but it's another thing that Iwatani was actually working on. But Namco did have plans to expand Pac-Man, just probably not as fast as Midway would have wanted. But yeah, Super Pac-Man didn't come out that long after Miss Pac-Man came out.
That's true. And it really wasn't nearly as good.
Yeah, it's not that great a game, but
Cool. Okay, yeah, I did not know that. I was under the impression for some reason Super Pac-Man was also developed by Midway. I had that somehow stored in the back of my head long, and that's why I said that. But okay, corrected.
All right. Next up, talking about Jack Trammell's coming shift to the mass market. You said that Commodore almost exclusively went mass market. That is absolutely not true. You can look in every single computer magazine. You can still go to a computer store and get a Commodore thing. It's just that the buyers did not like Jack after what he did.
Okay, and we're not going to spoil it because that's still coming and it will be fun to talk about.
Yeah, I'm not sure how much it was reported on in detail in the press, but you might know.
I haven't gotten that far yet in my research, but I'm sure that I'll be able to find at least a few dealer letters in the letter pages of certain magazines. I'm hoping at least that that should be coming at some point.
Mm-hmm. All right. Then at one point you were talking about kind of the role of venture capital within the computer software industry. And this is something I'm going to call somebody out here. Dr. Lane Nooney. Can't remember what her department is, but she went on a thing about Twitter recently about how the entire reason that computer games fell apart is because greedy venture capitalists came in and expected a return that they were never going to get out of it. But in actuality, in terms of game software, there weren't that many companies that actually took that. And you even kind of talked about this yourself, that Ed Zarin of Muse did not take venture capital software. Sierra did, and they were able to get out of that. And because Lane Nooney is an expert on Sierra, she feels like she's trying to apply that to everybody. But that was not the case for everybody. Broderbund did take a little venture capital, but they didn't have to pay it out for like 5 years or something. So that didn't change their trajectory at all. Everybody else, basically, no, they didn't take venture.
Gotcha. Now, and I know also there's a few other people who didn't take the money. One of my upcoming interviews. So now the question is, was there a variation between people who were developing in video games at the time from computer software? I mean, I know we always talk about how many people got into 2600 production, but were there really that many standalone 2600 producers that weren't part of, a major corporation or
I think it was about
major publishing?
I think it was about half and half. Like, I'm thinking Apollo was not tied to that. Activision and Eniac, obviously, were not tied to another corporation. The U.S. Games was tied to Quaker Oats, Fisher Price, and I know, Activision took venture and Eniac took venture. Not sure about Games by Apollo. But
Sirius was attached to 21st Century. So
they weren't owned by them, though.
No, but they were attached to them as their publisher, and they were also the ones giving them basically they get into 2600 production because 21st Century says we need these games, produce them, and we'll sell them, and also finance part of the development.
Yeah, I mean, by the time those guys were getting in, they didn't get out many games because everything was falling apart.
Exactly. Yeah.
I think in the console industry, yes, there was a lot more venture flying around, but not so much in the computer game industry.
Gotcha. Makes sense.
Okay. And further on venture, you said that the founders of Epix took venture, but there is no founders of Epix. There is one founder of Epix, John Connolly. It's John Connolly? Yeah. John Connolly.
I can't remember which of the ones left first.
Well, John Freeman left first, but I just can't remember if it was two Johns or not. So I think it's John Connolly, and John Freeman was not actually a founder, but he was given stock. So this is just another one of those founders kind of thing.
Okay, I always and I may be using a bad source for this, but I thought that it was originally founded by the two of them over Thanksgiving of '78.
Yeah, and then Alex talked to Connolly and confirmed that he had made the company by himself before bringing Freeman in.
Ah, okay, that's good to know. That's actually a retroactive Department of Corrections correction for the very first episode of this podcast.
Yeah, and the timeline's kind of skewy on that, but we're not going to talk about that. What we are going to talk about is your Space War timeline, because you got completely confused.
Oh, yeah.
Okay.
This one's a bad one, yeah.
So let us lay it out. So first of all, Space War comes out 1962, and if anyone says 1961, punch them in the face. You have my permission. After that, Nolan Bushnell and Ted Dabney create Computer Space for Nutting Associates in 1971. At the same time, there is a group of a couple guys in Stanford, Bill Pitts, Hugh Tuck, and a couple friends that he enlisted as well, creating the Galaxy game that was in the Stanford Student Union that was there from late November 1971 to 1979 or something like that. And you said that the Galaxy game, which you couldn't name, had the original people from Space War working on it. No, the only connection is that Bill Pitts was part of the Stanford Artificial Intelligence Laboratory, or project is actually the correct thing. It's SAPE, not SAIL, surprisingly enough.
Okay.
But which was in part founded by Steve Russell of Space War fame.
Gotcha. All right, and I think that's really where my confusion came in. I knew there was some weird off-brand connection there, but you are correct. There's nobody from the original team involved in the Galaxy game.
Yes. So that is Department of Corrections for August 1981, and we will check you in next time for August of 1991.
Thank you, as always, Ethan, and we'll see you next week.
Beep, beep.
So Carl, you didn't even know about the Eniac shareholders. I mean, I thought you knew about every single lawsuit ever in this business.
To be honest with you, I have not run across those yet. And when Ethan told me about them, it's one of those things I am probably going to end up doing a deep dive on at some point, because the fact that there's lawsuits, that somebody gets sued. Now, remember, just because somebody threatens a lawsuit doesn't mean that it actually went to court. It just means somebody had to pay money behind the scenes. So, looking into who actually ended up ponying up cash for the Eniac patents is something that I really would like to get into. But the problem is patents only run for a very limited amount of time. So it's highly unlikely that any of those patents survive long enough to impact video games or computer games. Okay. They would have already expired way before that. Yeah. Similar to how the original Odyssey patents affected a lot of consoles, including the 16-bit consoles like the Mega Drive and the Super Nintendo, but they no longer impacted things like the PlayStation because they had expired by then.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, but yeah, no, my interest is piqued, and as soon as I have a little window in my research time, I am definitely going to be hitting that hard. So yes, my knowledge is not complete either, unfortunately.
That's quite all right. Quite all right. Ready to jump into the time machine, mate?
Yes. Let's turn on the time machine and head back 40 years to September of... No. I have a feeling. I have got a feeling. We first have to go back 50 years to September of 1971. And unfortunately, we don't have a sound effect for this one. So let's just pretend. Woo, 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 woo. Welcome to September of 1971. Mads, what's our headline?
UK computer industry on the fritz.
International Computers Limited, the UK computer giant that was formed through the Industrial Expansion Act of 1968, a law that merged several of the UK's biggest companies in the sector into one monolith meant to ensure the country's future in computing in light of increased US and Japanese competition, is flailing. Additional promises of funds from the UK government have been made, but it will be an uphill battle to keep foreign competitors at bay.
So, International Computers Limited, did they release any computers that we would know of today? Any names that we'd recognize?
No. These guys are mainly, in this point in time, they're doing mainframes, probably also some mini computers. The real problem with them is that they're falling further and further behind on the tech side. And the reason why this is really relevant is that the big impetus when Thatcher comes in to decentralize the British economy, to get government out of owning companies and instead, giving support funds to companies, which is going to make some of the enterprises, like some of Sinclair's ventures, possible, that are going to be helping fund a lot of the stuff that comes out of Cambridge and so forth. That is going to come out as a reaction to this kind of centralized, government-supported big industry.
Okay.
So this idea of, a whole bunch of tiny little companies, and also a lot of the vitriol that Clive Sinclair espouses in interviews around around 1981, about the BBC giving Acorn the contract for the BBC Micro, is reflected of this, where he's talking about how, the government should, or government agencies or government organizations like the BBC should not be deciding who the winners are in the marketplace.
Yeah.
Is directly connected to this kind of event.
So I wonder how opposed he would have been to it if it had been his company who got the contract.
Oh, he wouldn't have been against it at all. He would have just explained that they chose the right company because that was Clive Sinclair.
That's business.
I mean, he wanted that contract, and he could not understand why people would not take the cheapest computer.
No.
Especially since the screen went blank every time you pressed a key. Yeah, no, it's an interesting little tidbit just to see, that they were trying to make themselves competitive by creating, these monoliths similar to, the European countries all have most of them have like their national airline, like Germany has Lufthansa and stuff, or Air France in France, which may not be directly government owned or controlled, but are heavily government sponsored organizations.
Yeah.
And they did that because they saw the U.S. airlines coming in. They saw, the big transatlantic flights being done by the U.S. They wanted to have that competitive edge, especially since the big planes were all coming out of the U.S. And this idea that the only way we can survive is, to consolidate. If we have 20 companies in the country competing with one another, we're going to get our lunch eaten by the big guys from across the ocean. And, it's really an interesting just moment in time. And computers are not the only area where the UK did this, and it's also not the only area where it's not going to succeed. But unfortunately, exactly what they were afraid of, namely, they were going to have their lunch eaten, and all the little competing companies inside the UK were going to be pushed out of the market, is going to come true within the next 20 years.
Yes, indeed.
Yeah, so it's an interesting back and forth on policy and different experiments to try to avoid the inevitable.
Yeah.
So, that's the only story for 1971. Let's turn on the time machine and head to September of 1981.
Rapidly becoming an international craze. Computer revolution. 1981. Eniac.
This is only the first step in newspapers by computer.
Right in the midst of it, thank you.
Welcome to September of 1981. Mads, what's our first story?
Frogger goes head-to-head with Donkey Kong.
Two of the greatest games of the golden era of arcades are written up in this month's Vending Times. Sega Gremlin's Frogger and Nintendo's Donkey Kong. Both have recognizable player characters, both have the rescue of the fairer sex as the main goal, and both may appeal to a female audience as well as the traditional male audience while incorporating multiple phases.
So you really have to save a damsel in distress in Frogger?
Yeah, you're trying to get to the other side of the screen where, you basically, there's a female jumping back and forth and you get extra points if you catch her.
I totally forgot that part. I mean, you start by crossing the road, and then you have to jump on the logs and avoid the alligators, and then you get to the goal. But I forgot that there was a female frog there somewhere.
Yeah. That's one of the big aspects of it, where she's randomly appearing in different spots there. So if you time it right, you can get extra points by landing on her. Yeah,
makes sense now that you say it. And in Donkey Kong, by the way, you rescue a damsel in distress. What's her name, Carl?
At this point in time, she has no name, but she will be called Pauline at some point.
Well done.
Yes. I've learned my lesson. And it's interesting to see both of these. I mean, because they're both vertical screen games, which, is not necessarily standard at this point, and never does become standard. And of course, Donkey Kong, we've talked about it in previous episodes, but Donkey Kong is Nintendo's attempt to salvage the debacle that of their first game that they released in the States, which was, crap, what was the name of it? Space Scope or something?
Laser Scope. I'd like to say, but I'm not sure.
Laser Scope. Yeah, something like that. It doesn't matter. It was a terrible game. And so this quickly thrown together or relatively quickly thrown together game is going to save them. It's going to turn everything around, and Nintendo will suddenly be a force to be reckoned with. And the fact that Vending Times has both of these announcements of these games coming out on the same page, it's like, you know, the 16-bit wars, like encapsulated Sega versus Nintendo, and on the same page of the same issue. It's just kind of cool.
And two huge games.
Oh, massive. I mean, Frogger becomes like a mainstay, like just a game that everybody recognizes. But the one difference is Frogger, you can't really do anything else with that character. Frogger is a frog. True. And he's not, you know, an anthropomorphic frog or anything. Whereas that Mario character, the hero character in Donkey Kong, is a human being. He's versatile. You can put him into any scenario, and he can do whatever a human can do. And that's going to make Mario the massive character, whereas Frogger is basically going to keep reappearing in different versions of Frogger.
Yeah. And none of them ever gets to be as good as Frogger was itself, do they? I mean, I don't remember any of them being memorable.
I mean, I'm probably not in the majority on this, but I still consider the best version of Frogger to be the Game Boy Color version.
Okay, I've never played that one.
It's got super tight control. Unlike the arcade game, where it can sometimes feel a little finicky, in my opinion, it's spot on control. The screens aren't overly long, and that's another issue with the arcade version, where there's so many layers that it can sometimes feel like, you know, I've gotten through so much and I die on the last one, and it just takes so long to get back there. So everything's a little bit tighter. Everything the rounds feel like they're moving faster. I really, really dig the Game Boy Color port of it. It's a more comfortable game, in my opinion.
Okay. I'll have to check that out.
Yeah, definitely. It's worth your time. It's one of those ones, I keep coming back to it. I've got a little portable Raspberry Pi thing, and it's pretty much that and Super Pang are the two games I play most on it. So would you say you play those games casually? Oh, definitely casually.
So casual gamers may be outnumbering the hardcore.
As the market for coin-op games increases with more and more casual players walking up to machines to throw in a quarter or two, the days of universal hits may be at an end, with some games only doing well where the hardcore congregate and more casual games bombing in those same locations. Ira Bettelman of C.A. Robinson and Company, a major California distributor, speculates that this new casual market is now generating more money than the hardcore market, a major shift from just 18 to 24 months before.
So what they really mean by casual gamers is not what we mean by casual gamers today. It's just gamers that want their games to be slightly easier, really?
No. It's okay. Remember, when you're talking here about the arcade industry in the early days, because while consoles exist, the 2600 exists, it doesn't really have that super, super deep penetration in society yet. What you're dealing with is these machines that you operate, by throwing a quarter in, are showing up everywhere. They're in convenience stores, supermarkets, pizzerias, you name it. In addition to the traditional arcade. And it was, up until recently, the case that the people that the operators made money off of were the hardcore, like the teenage boys who would blow $5 on the game and really study how it worked and try to get the high scores and stuff. And what is happening now, especially with games like Pac-Man and Rally X and so forth showing up, these are games that are simple enough in their mechanics. And if you really compare it, and Ethan and I did that one special episode about the AMOA in 1980, where we talked about all the big important games that came out, and the two colossuses, I can't remember which. There's a rule for when it's an I and when it's a US, but it doesn't matter. The two biggest games that come out of that are Defender and Pac-Man, which are
that's what I meant to make. I mean, you need to make the casual gamers to please those guys. You need to make the games easier, or at least pick up and play, because they'd be not interested in a game that you needed to spend $2 on actually learning how to play before you get to spend more than 10 seconds. They'd be interested in something you just pop a quarter in, and even though you're a complete noob, you'll probably play a couple of minutes and figure out how to do it. Exactly.
And it used to be that if you had a game like that, there weren't enough casual gamers. Not enough people would just walk up and throw a quarter in to make that game pay for itself. You had to hook the hardcore who were going to spend a lot of money in order to justify the cost of the equipment. But now gaming is becoming so ubiquitous, and so many people are now walking up to the machines and popping in a quarter, even if it's just one quarter. There's so many of them that you put a Pac-Man on site in a supermarket and you're going to be making your money. And that is a change in the market. So will you make as much money in an arcade off of that? Probably not. But if you put the arcade style game, the game that should be in an arcade, like an Asteroids, which is a very difficult game to play if you really think about it with the physics and everything else going on. Or Defender, which, you got to capture the people, you got to save the people, you got to keep track of what's going on. You can go in both directions. You got the extra button to, do the warp thing and all this stuff. It is a relatively complex game that's going to require this hardcore audience. And nowadays, the businessman walking, getting his drink at the 7-Eleven, between meetings is maybe going to pop in a quarter into Pac-Man and so forth. So it's that idea of it becoming a activity for everybody.
Yeah, you definitely need to design the games for a different market now.
Exactly. Well, but that's the thing. What he's saying is you can't have a universal hit anymore.
Yeah, see that I disagree with. I'd say hits like Frogger, Donkey Kong, Pac-Man should appeal to both the hardcore and the casual gamer. Because good game design is pick up and play, but then it quickly gets harder and you need to train to master it.
Yeah, but also remember, the truly hardcore, they don't want to be playing the same game that the casuals are playing.
See, that might be the problem.
And this is the thing. It's like, you have the people who are just like, do I really want to play Pac-Man? No, I want to play the tough game. I want to play the one with body parts flying around or whatever else. You're going to have those two. You still see it to this day. There are the people who are like, the League of Legends people, and then you've got some weird hardcore variant of the game that, only the most dyed-in-the-wool people are playing. Or you still get, there's companies that are making hardcore tabletop style strategy games.
Yes.
That you and I never even hear about.
Yep.
But they're out there.
Yeah, that's true.
And they have their audience. So, and those people are not interested in playing anything else. So I think Bettelman is right that you're going to have to figure out, which location do you put the McDonald's cheeseburger, which one do you put, the super spicy, only open from 2 a.m. to 4 a.m. Mexican burrito place?
Yeah. But at least in the Philippines, they didn't have to consider this at all because Marcos bans video games.
Dude, you are on fire with the transitions today. Ferdinand Marcos, president of the Philippines, and we use the word president very, very loosely here, has banned all arcade video games, pinball, and slot machines as they were creating havoc, in quotation marks, with the morality of the nation's youth. Violators face a fine of $600 or between 6 months and 12 years in jail.
Wow. So that would be if you had an arcade or had arcade machines where people could come and play.
Yeah. Arcade machines, slot machines, or pinball.
Yeah, well, that sounds pretty harsh.
Yeah. I was doing a little bit of background research on it. There's a Wikipedia even on it. And the ban lasted quite a while. The activities went underground. So there were like speakeasies that were arcades and stuff. And in some regions of the country, it was not as enforced as in others.
Okay.
As, quasi-dictatorships tend to be. But yeah, so this is pretty crazy stuff that's going on there because, it's corrupting the youth.
Yeah, it sounds pretty crazy. Did anybody have any guess as to why he would ban them? Because corrupting the youth sounds like an excuse for something else. I mean, did he really think this was corrupting the youth?
I don't know too much about Marcos. I remember him from back in the day. I remember he gets dethroned and blah, blah, blah. Philippines has had some interesting leaders since then.
Yes.
I'm going to leave it at that. I think it's more an issue of these things are coming from the outside. We probably are not having the best economic time. How do we focus people's attention on something other than my mismanagement of the country? We're going to blame these, you don't say foreigners, but, these machines that are coming from the outside that are a bad influence. And we're going to say not only that we're doing something to save our youth, but we will punish the bad people that are harming our youth.
Yeah, yeah.
It's a wonderful little bit of propaganda that really solves no problems, but is a wonderful code for attacking the evil outside force.
Yes. Yeah, makes sense, actually.
Mm.
So, UK's Century Electronics announces interchangeable arcade system.
The Century Video System promises to be a cheap, affordable system for operators that will give them the ability to easily switch out games. 2 games are already developed, Dark Warrior and Cosmos, and a third is on the way.
So what would be the medium here? I mean, are we talking something like the Jammer standard where you exchange the entire boards, or are they loading stuff from cartridges, or what was the system?
It's boards. It's boards. Okay. Similar to, it's not an industry standard like JAMA.
No.
But as we've been talking about for the last few months, Sega has unveiled their interchangeable or, their system for switching out games. So you can leave the cabinet in the location or just bring the cabinet in, switch out the innards when the game no longer performs, and send it out with a brand new game so you don't have to pay for the cabinet.
Okay.
When I was talking to Jim Trucano, the former AMOA president and a longtime operator, he made the joke, he's like, a coin-op operator is really in the furniture moving business.
Yes,
because you're constantly moving this giant box from place to place. And once the game stops earning, well, he said his first day on the job doing this professionally was taking a whole bunch of machines like original Pongs down to the garbage dump and just dumping them in a landfill.
Yeah. So sad.
This is so sad. So sad. It hurts. But the idea here is that you can keep the same box and just switch out the games. And so we're seeing this idea coming out of Sega. We've got, Data East doing it with cassettes. And now this UK company, and the UK doesn't really play a role in the arcade business yet as far as game development is concerned. So this, they have to be price conscious if they're going to be competing. So the idea of offering this thing where it's like, hey, you don't recognize our games and we don't have all the big publicity of Atari and Namco and all these other guys, but we can do it on the cheap. Yeah. Is their attempt to sell it. And the system is not going to go very far. They're talking about, there's going to be all these games. They get 3 games out. And the third game is Hunchback, which our UK listeners will probably recognize as one of the very important early Ocean titles.
Yes, and a beautiful game.
Yeah, absolutely gorgeous. And Hunchback does for Ocean in the early days what Mario did for Nintendo. He becomes this character that they're using in all sorts of stuff. There's a sports Olympics type of game with Hunchback and direct sequels to the arcade game Hunchback. And I don't know how many games exactly, but it's at least 5 or 6 Hunchback titles come out of Ocean, even though there's only one arcade game.
So it's weird to me that when we were back in 81, just the fact that you have one machine where you can switch between 3 different boards is news. Later on, we'll get cartridge systems within the arcade machines, like the Neo Geo MBS or Taito's F3 system, or what is it called? I forget the Capcom system.
Wasn't it just Capcom system? No.
CPS?
No, System 16 was Sega.
CPS, I think.
Yeah, CPS. Yeah. CPS 1, CPS 2.
But all of those systems are, maybe that's late 80s or even early 90s before they get along. Yeah.
It's going to take, we don't get the JAMA standard until the late 80s.
Yeah, okay.
And, or maybe in Japan a little bit earlier, but it's going to take a while for that idea to percolate and for the industry, for everybody to agree on it.
But the funny thing is that all of the operators must be yelling that they want this.
They definitely do.
To get out of being a furniture movement service.
Well, it's still going to be, until JAMA comes around, the idea of doing the conversion on site is almost impossible.
Yeah.
Even with Sega's thing, it's still not going to be possible to be doing it on site in like a supermarket or something, because you need to be working on it for like 30 minutes or something.
Yeah.
And you got to drill and whatever else if you're changing the number of buttons or controller configs. But the idea that you can bring it into the shop and you don't have to buy the whole damn box is a problem, because remember, at this point, you're not buying the games directly from the manufacturer if you're an operator. You're buying them from a distributor.
Yes.
And so there's regional distributors for the different manufacturers who are then selling to the operators. Now, these distributors do not want to see this business die. Because if you're just buying the board and some decals for the box, well, you can do that over mail. You don't need the distributor anymore.
Oh, that's true. But make them obsolete.
Exactly. So at the same time, until this method has proven itself, the manufacturers don't want to piss off the distributors. So you have this problem where you might have a good idea. You might be able to do this. But how do you keep the distributor in the loop long enough to make them obsolete? How do they assist in their own destruction? And so many industries go through this same process of, well, suddenly we don't need this in between, but in the transition period, we still do need them. It's kind of like, retail, brick and mortar retail of, let's say you have a retail shop selling sports shoes. And some of the stores are company owned. That's fine. You put up an ad saying, hey, if you didn't find the shoe here, check us out at, retailsportshoes.com for more selection. But what do you do with the franchise operations, the ones that aren't owned by the corporate? How do you convince them that they should be advertising a website that they get no money out of?
Yeah, that'd be hard to do.
But that was what a lot of people were facing in the 90s and 2000s as all of this e-commerce stuff started to happen.
Yeah.
And ultimately it led to most of them closing, which is, kind of a problem at the end of the day.
Mm.
But, oh well. We're getting ahead of ourselves, I think.
Mm. So, ready for the next piece of news here. Mattel Electronics becomes independent unit.
Mattel Electronics, the division responsible for handheld electronic games and the Intellivision, has been made an independent unit of the company. This will allow them more flexibility in both their budgeting and marketing This will allow them more flexibility in both their budgeting for marketing and research and development.
Yes, so they can make some great additions to the Intellivision. Was that actually Intellivision? Was that the console that never got the keyboard add-on?
Exactly. Yes.
So let's get their R&D department working on that then.
Yeah. I mean, and again, I'm plugging all my interviews here, but it is relevant. When I talked to Don Daglow, who was one of the early guys working there, he was first assigned to make software for that thing, and then very quickly they realized it's not really going anywhere, and he was taken off of working for the keyboard add-on. But yeah, so in Mattel Electronics, and we've been talking about this for a while, but the electronic handheld market is all but collapsed at this point. And it's important that Mattel Electronics has this independence so that they're not being pushed by forces inside of Mattel Toys to, be investing in things that may not have a future. Because remember, the handheld electronics are things that go on pegs in the store. And so there's, these conflicting interests of, we want the toy company, the toy stores to buy X amount of pegs worth of product from us. Maybe we should throw more handheld electronics on there. Whereas if Mattel Electronics says there's no future here, we're not creating the product just so you can pad out the shelves. Instead, we need to be putting it into innovative new products that are probably just going to be too expensive to put on a shelf, like Intellivision game cartridges.
Okay.
Yeah. And this is right before the famous Intellivision ads, which are coming. And we'll talk about those when they hit. But Intellivision suddenly gets these very, very competitive ads where they're comparing the screenshots of the Intellivision versus the Atari 2600.
Yeah.
And
meanwhile, Atari's second quarter revenue rises 86%.
Nice transition. I like that. Year-over-year revenue for the second quarter of 1981 rose by 86% from $16.2 million in 1980 to $39.2 million in 1981. Atari's meteoric rise continues to impress. While Atari's income reached $39.2 million, its parent company Warner's net income for the quarter was $42.5 million.
So how do I understand that out of those 42.5 million, the 39.2 was from Atari, or?
Exactly.
Wow.
Exactly. And this is the moment when the tail is wagging the dog, or better said, when Warner is not the main driver of revenue anymore. Atari has gone from a relatively small portion of the big Warner empire to just the thing that's making all the money.
Yes.
And unfortunately, Warner has this very bad policy of, we always have to increase every quarter. And unfortunately, these numbers are not sustainable.
Oh, of course not.
And remember, this is the second quarter of 81. So we're not talking Christmas season here. So the Christmas season in 81 is going to be much, much bigger. And so the idea that you're going to have to somehow keep these numbers going after that is simply ludicrous. But at the same time, Warner always increases from quarter to quarter.
Yeah, I guess at some point the market has to be saturated. The people who want an Atari 2600 will have an Atari 2600.
Yeah. You would think that somebody at some point would notice that, but yes. Yeah. And the interesting thing here is also in the trade publications, they always have these columns where they're talking in different regions of the country, which toys are selling, because it's still a very regional thing at this point. The big toy sellers like Toys R Us and stuff have not completely dominated the market. And they actually give some price quotes for the systems, and I thought it was interesting just so give an idea of where everybody's at. The three consoles, main consoles on the market are the VCS at $139. Then you got the Magnavox Odyssey 2 at $148. So very comparable price point, even though it's a considerably more powerful system. And Mattel's Intellivision is coming in at $250. And that was actually a sales price. So the Mattel system is way, way more expensive at this point, which also explains why they're not really catching up to the 2600.
Of course, yeah.
Yeah.
But maybe was that actually going back to, I'm sorry, going back to the keyboard all the time, but was that because, did they think they could keep that price tag because they were selling it as something that would be a computer and not just a game playing device after a while?
I cannot say anything specific for that, but I would probably just estimate it's the cost of building it. Remember, the Intellivision is using a 16-bit processor.
Yeah, that's true.
It's like I said, once we get the Plimpton ads, these comparison ads, it's so striking how primitive the 2600 is in its graphics and stuff to what the Intellivision can produce.
Yeah,
it is night and frickin' day. If you look at games like Don Daglow's Utopia, which is, it's in many ways a real-time strategy game with, resource management and everything else, running here in 1981, 82. And the 2600 is just barely able to produce a handful of sprites moving around the screen. So it's just two completely different generations of hardware. It's the NES versus Genesis battle, really.
Yeah, but probably at a point in time where the consumers didn't understand those differences fully. So maybe running those ads was a really good idea.
Oh, it was an amazing idea, and it's totally going to help the Intellivision. Unfortunately, it's all going to be coming at kind of the wrong time.
Yes.
I mean, there's other forces, but hey, we'll get to the crash soon enough. The 40th anniversary of the crash is on the horizon. And just also for comparisons purposes, because we talked a little bit about the electronic handhelds, which are in steep decline at this point. The Entex Galaxian, it was a little handheld Galaxian game, was retailing for $52.97. So $53 buys you this handheld Galaxian, but for $140 you could buy a VCS.
Yeah.
So we're really seeing how in order for the handheld electronic games to even compare with console games to keep up with the interactivity, they're getting so expensive that it doesn't even pay off to buy them anymore.
Yeah. I know what I'd be buying, so.
Exactly. And that's what everybody else is going to do as well.
So speaking of revenue records, there's a revenue record for Toys R Us and Coleco.
Yes.
Yes.
Toy mega retailer Toys R Us reported a second quarter sales increase of 33.4% year over year, with an 18.5% increase in same-store sales. Coleco has seen similarly impressive gains with their best quarter ever, with a whopping $57.5 million in sales, but that was due to an increase in their pool business. Their electronic games business trailed their 1980 sales.
So let me get this straight. Coleco, the Connecticut leather company, who was into video games, of course, because you are as a leather company, also had a pool business?
They were mainly a pool business. So the history of Coleco is interesting.
Did they trade in leather? Please tell me they did.
Okay, yes. The original Coleco leather company and Alex Smith did a great episode on this in his podcast, They Create Worlds, the whole history of Coleco. So they do start out with leather. They make their bones with little leather kits. They'd send you all the pieces to make leather wallets and stuff, and it was born out of the leftovers from their normal leather production.
Yeah.
They would then sell as these kits for people to make, stuff at home. And that started making more money than the primary business because the profit margins were so good. And that then leads to other materials, and that's how they get into the pool business, where they're like the kings of blow-up kiddie pools and stuff. Okay. And that's why their summer is so big, but they didn't really have anything for the winter months. And they tried a whole bunch of different things, and ultimately video games is one of them. They will also be the ones that make Cabbage Patch Kids.
Yes, I remember those.
Yeah, and those are coming down the pipeline as well. So they're going to have the Cabbage Patch dolls floating the company for quite a while. Then, of course, the Colecovision is coming, but that's going to come a little too late to really, it's going to hit right around the crash is going to hurt that. But so this is why Coleco is in all sorts of stuff. But the important thing here is because they were so big in the electronic games business, and Michael Katz talked about this because he was the guy heading up that section of the company at this point, it's dropping. And the sales are worse this year than last year, while consoles are going up.
Yeah.
And this is why at this point in time, they're already working on the ColecoVision.
Yes.
They're not going to get it out in time for this Christmas, but they're already working on it. And this is also why their big thing is going to be getting these big licenses. And this is why they're going to have the rights to Donkey Kong when it hits consoles.
And have a really good version of Donkey Kong there.
Really good version of Donkey Kong. And they're also going to make a lot of money with the 2600 version of Donkey Kong.
Oh, yeah, that's true. That's true.
Yeah, and they're also going to get things like Burger Time. Burger Time on the ColecoVision, also an excellent conversion of the game. Mm-hmm. So, they're starting to prepare their console entry because they can see that the electronic games thing is not where it's at.
So even more sales. We have Apple sales triple. So our good friends as Apple will have a good year as well, it seems.
Oh, definitely. Apple has reported that their first quarter sales for 1981 have tripled over the same period a year ago, and a 16% increase over the previous quarter. They also claim to have produced 200,000 Apple IIs.
So Apple IIs were the machines that they pushed to pretty much every school in America, right?
Yeah, the Apple II in the schools thing, we've talked about that also. There's these ads have been running for a while, about how Apples are great for schools, and then they're going to have these purchase things, but it's mainly going to come out of the Minnesota school system, which had invested very heavily in the 70s in mainframe access terminals for their schools and stuff that when they adopt the Apple, that's game over. We talked about that in a previous episode. I'll put a link in the show notes. But Minnesota has already decided that that's the machine that they're going to go with, and that's why they're just selling to the schools in record numbers.
Yeah.
Well,
those are some good customers to have.
Yeah, but I mean, think about it. The machine has been on the market since 1977, and they're just now hitting 200,000 units.
Yeah,
that's not
impressive. No,
it's not.
Yeah.
And the VIC-20 has just hit. The VIC-20 is going to hit 1 million by the end of, I believe, 82.
But it's a completely different price tag, isn't it?
A completely different price tag, and well, it's also going to be a very different place to sell it, as Ethan told us. So there's going to be real issues with Apple. I mean, and Apple has already had problems with the Apple III, the successor machine. The production problems have been terrible. Now they're claiming they've finally been ironed out and they can go into full production. And almost the entire original design team has been fired, which is not going to help further, expansion of the system, because the Apple II keeps getting new iterations.
Yeah.
And so without the original Apple III team there to really plan out the future of the platform, it's going to be dead. They're going to have to continue to rely on the Apple II for a very long time. And I've really included this primarily because of our discussion last month when we talked about Robot War. Because remember, that was a game where you literally have to know how to program to play the game.
Yes.
And up until recently, the Apple II user base were people who bought it to program. They were people who bought it to, code their own software to do things in their business or whatever, or just hobbyists who wanted to learn how the machine worked. This new batch of people buying it, these are people buying it for VisiCalc. These are people buying it for games like Castle Wolfenstein. These are people buying it for educational software that's coming out, or to access CompuServe or whatever else is out there. This sales increase is that shift in markets that, that original group of people who bought it, they are no longer going to be the majority, especially with this massive speed increase of purchases.
Yeah, makes sense. This is also the point in time where you can actually start to earn money on selling software, right?
Oh yeah. I mean, VisiCalc is one of the ones that really sets the tone there, but we've already seen it with companies like Sierra and Muse and stuff. These guys are starting to make not massive Microsoft type money, but they are making money off of software, and that is not going to stop, especially as the user base for the machines increases.
Yeah, true. So the next piece of news, Exidy exits the home computer market.
Exidy, maker of arcade games such as Death Race and Spectre, has sold off its data systems division, which marketed its Sorcerer microcomputer. The division has gone to a venture capital group called Biotech Capital Corporation. The system didn't last in the U.S. beyond this sale, but Australian and Dutch sub-licensees would continue to build and sell the machine for a few more years.
So I've actually never heard about the Sorcerer.
There's a reason for that. It's pretty much, it didn't really do anything impressive. I believe it comes out originally in 78, but don't quote me on that. I'd have to look it up again.
Okay.
And we've talked about it a few times on the show, but it's an unimpressive system.
Yeah.
Now, the interesting thing was that it was coming from an arcade manufacturer like Exidy. And Exidy wasn't the only one doing this. Bally also tried with their own console/computer, and it was a programmable system. And you could tell, it's like, well, why not? These are people who know about the electronics. They know how the systems work. They know how to output stuff to a TV screen, because that's what they're doing in the arcade cabinets. It would make sense. But again and again, these guys are not used to consumer level production. So, a big game will sell 1,000 units. Well, 1,000 units is different than having to produce 30,000 units and then dealing with individual retailers all over the country and stuff. So it's very much something that just went beyond their competence, and so they've sold it off. The interesting things here about this are the Australian and Dutch sub-licensees. And I don't know too much about this. I found some information online, but apparently in Holland, they did something similar to what the BBC is going to be doing in January of '82 with their television show about, programming and stuff. The Dutch did this already a couple of years earlier with a rebranded Sorcerer computer. So They had a television show trying to teach people how to use the computer and program it on it and so forth. And they had the Sorcerer as the base computer to do this with. And there was a company manufacturing them. I don't know exactly which components were made where, but I'd love to hear from any listeners with memories of this from Holland, because this really did kind of catch my imagination. And it's one of those bits where suddenly you're like, oh, I thought, the UK did this first. And suddenly, there's a Dutch thing doing it as well. So that was kind of cool. And there's a company in Australia that's also selling the Sorcerer computer, and they're going to just keep selling them as well for quite a while, even though it's no longer being produced or sold in the US.
So it seems Holland was actually a place here in Europe that was a lot less homogeneous than what we had here in Denmark or you had in Germany. I mean, we're used to the 8-bit era being C64 and maybe some Spectrums and Amstrads, but in Holland, I know for a fact that they had a lot of MSX, different MSX clones, and of course also the C64s, the Amstrads, the Spectrums. But now you say they have the Sorcerer there as well. It seems that it was an interesting place to grow up in the 80s, really.
Definitely, but I mean, it makes sense. The Dutch, I mean, if you watch, Holland, I'm guessing Denmark was similar. Television shows were not really translated. And Holland always was a trading nation. So I can see why it would be easy for them to get all sorts of stuff imported with virtually no import taxes placed on them. So it would make sense that Japanese machines like the MSX would be easy to get in, at least the raw components, so that you could rebadge them or whatever and release them in Holland. Yeah.
There was actually a good interview on the Retro Hour recently with a guy who ran an MSX magazine, MSX-based magazine in Holland, I think. So, yeah. So if you want to know something about the early MSX scene in Holland, you can listen to that.
Okay, I'm still a couple months behind on my Retro Hour episodes. They're piling up on my phone. I will definitely have to check that out.
Yeah,
because that's
a good one.
Would be cool. Yeah. Okay.
So the New York Times profiles pervasiveness of computer tech in Japan.
Japan, more than any other country in the world, has invested in automation and computer tech to increase efficiency. The profile of the Japanese integration of tech into its economy by the New York Times depicts how factories are being run less and less by people. Electronics marketplaces like Akihabara, and I know I'm killing that, promote access to tech, and regulatory hands-off approaches are allowing companies to work together in ways the West cannot or has not achieved, despite not being able to shake the image of a copycat tech culture.
Yeah, I remember back in the day, we always looked to Japan and thought that they were like 10, 20 years ahead of us. I mean, it was like a place in the future, wasn't it?
Definitely. I mean, especially at this point in time, it just seemed like all the gadgets and stuff that you may have had in the West were still either not accessible or they didn't have the societal acceptance. You know, it was like you saw some kid walking down the street with a Walkman. You were like, oh, you know, blocking off the world or not cool or whatever. And instead, you know, just totally embracing the tech seemed to be at least the Western perspective of Japan at this point.
Yeah, that's true.
Yeah. And it was interesting to read this article because they do talk about how, you know, everybody just still sees them as copycats, especially in computer tech, because they're not developing their own CPUs yet. They're not developing their own programming languages and all this. But they are taking what exists and really running with it and making the most out of that tech. And we'll see that later on, you know, with the widespread adoption of the Famicom and how gaming culture is very, very different there. So it's interesting just to get this momentary thing. And also there's a not subtle undertone of the Japanese are going to steal our jobs type of thing. So
yes.
Because, you know, it's Reagan's America, and, you know, that's just the name of the game.
Yeah, of course. So we just talked about earlier that software has now become something that you can actually sell and earn money off. And that means that the first dedicated software retailer is born.
What may be the very first store dedicated exclusively to the sale of software, Programs Unlimited, has been born. An offshoot of Cut and Curl, a chain of hairdressers that have already expanded into other retail areas, the chain will cater to all manner of software. A public offering will be forthcoming, and the chain will expand with both company-owned and franchise locations over the next few years.
I love this. I mean, a chain of hairdressers now sells software. The Connecticut Leather Company sells video machines and pools, video game machines, of course. But it's crazy sometimes what these companies do. But a chain of hairdressers selling off software.
It's interesting. I when I ran across this story, and I originally found this in Byte magazine. But actually, I had missed that several other publications had already run articles about this in March and April. And I've put links to a bunch of it in the show notes. And also, there's more articles coming in the next few months about it as it gains prominence. The story behind this is fascinating. I think I've tracked down the co-founder of this, and I'm trying to get contact with him because I definitely need his story, but he hasn't gotten back to me yet, unfortunately.
So I wonder if this is still the time of manually copying discs and tapes and putting them into little Ziploc bags and printing stuff.
That is still happening in some local shops. There are still kids showing up with programs, but actually we're beyond that now.
Okay.
I mean, games like Ultima. Yeah, games like Ultima are coming out in boxes. All of the Sierra stuff is in boxes. Infocom, we're beyond that now.
Okay.
At this point. And this is what makes this interesting because this is the right time. And the story as it came out in different articles was it's the son of the Cut and Curl owner, or the founder, or whatever. I don't know exactly how the company's organized at this point, but basically the son of the guy who's running it is hanging out. He's a computer geek, and he's hanging out on a bulletin board on CompuServe. And the guy who's running the bulletin board is a former opera singer who's also a computer geek, and who's working in retail. And they start talking, and they come up with this idea of, why don't we sell software at retail? No computers in the store, not unlike everybody else, like Computerland and stuff that are selling both software and computers, but primarily computers. They're just going to sell the software, and they're going to do it in shopping malls.
Okay.
And so, the company has a fairly meteoric rise. And unfortunately, though, the crash in '83 is just going to wipe them out completely. They pop up a little bit, but by 84 they've already shut down all their stores. And but as far as I can tell, they max out at 45 stores.
So would they primarily be selling games? Is that why the crash?
Well, in their specific case, I can't tell you. But what ended up killing a lot of people in the crash was the fact that the VIC-20, as far as computer software is concerned, I don't know if they were also selling console software. But the VIC-20 and a few other systems like the TI-99 have the unfortunate side effect that due to memory restrictions, most of the software came on cartridge.
Yes.
Cartridges are a very different economic model than cassettes or discs. Because if my game doesn't sell on disc, you send it back to me, I pull the disc out of the box, I write another program on it, put it in a new box, and I'm out the cost of the box and shipping. The cartridge has to be manufactured, burnt onto a ROM chip, and if that thing doesn't sell, I can't do anything with it.
No, and it's a lot more expensive to actually create in the first place as well.
Oh, heck of a lot more expensive. Sierra Online almost doesn't make it because of this.
Yeah.
When I talked to Ken Williams, I mean, just the thought of Commodore systems, you could tell in his voice. It was like the VIC-20 was just this, yeah. He still has not forgiven the VIC-20 for that. It almost cost him the company. Had he not gotten the contract from IBM, a very well-financed contract to do King's Quest, he would have been dead in the water. Yeah. And so a lot of companies' Muse software disappears because of the crash. I don't know how much they did on the VIC-20, but they did some stuff. I just recently talked to Jeff Jewell, another entrepreneur of this era. His company also didn't make it. Sirius Software died because of the VIC-20. It's this cartridge-based software and the Atari 2600. That's a fun story. That interview is coming out in a few months as well. You remember, all interviews 3 months early for Patreon supporters. So no, it's the cartridge software. Yeah. That's what's going to end up killing all of these guys. That's what kills the crash. I think most of them would have survived if it was just disk-based stuff, because the relative investment and loss, while hard, would not have been catastrophic. But you go from, cost of materials being a few pennies or maybe $1 or $2 per game that you're selling for $30 or $40 to $5 to $10. That's a massive difference.
Yeah.
And so I don't know all the details about Programs Unlimited. Like I said, I've sent messages to the guy who I'm quite certain I found him, but I have not heard back, and I don't know if I will. So It would be very cool if I did that. So if anybody has that contact, please hook me up.
So the next piece of news is on Sesame Street, which to my mind has always been Sesamstraße, because I watched that on German TV back in the day when I was a kid. So Sesame Street is coming to the Apple II.
Back in our June 1979 jump, we talked about the Sesame Place Game Center, a computer lab of sorts at the Sesame Street theme park that had educational software. While they were working with Atari and Creative Computing to develop the programs then, the Children's Workshop, the company that makes Sesame Street, has now penned a deal with Apple to bring some of the games they developed to the Apple II as commercial educational products.
Okay, so have you played any of these?
I have not played any of them. I did see some screenshots and stuff over at Moby Games. I mean, it's very simple, recognize the letters and type of things like that. But the fact that they're signing this deal, that they're licensing out the Sesame Street characters and names for this software, is kind of cool.
So now you can count with Count Dracula?
Yes, it's not Count Dracula, he's just the Count.
Oh, he's just the Count, sorry.
Yeah, it's just the Count.
Yes.
Yes. One. Two.
Yeah, I love that
Three.
guy.
Yeah. He's my favorite character on that show.
Yeah, it was a good one. So, next piece of news is not as child-friendly, I guess.
No.
Although it is the way you make kids, isn't it? So, Soft Porn Adventures ad appears in Softwalk.
The famous Sierra text adventure that would become the foundation of Leisure Suit Larry gets what is probably its first ad in Soft Talk magazine.
So I feel, did we mention Soft Porn Adventures the last time I was recording with you, or am I just remembering talking to Chris about this?
Probably just talking to Chris. I don't think we talked about it, but
okay.
I have talked about it on the show before just because it is one of those interesting bits of software history. I mean, it's not a game developed internally at Sierra. It's developed by somebody on the outside. It's the only Sierra game that was ever released without graphics. It's a pure text adventure.
Yes.
And it's also one of their most sold titles of this era.
And a wonderful cover. Have you seen the cover?
Yes, and actually the cover photo is the ad. It's just a little bit of text around it.
Yeah.
And it's Roberta Williams topless in a pool. You don't see anything other than the shoulders, but still in a hot tub, and two other ladies. I believe they've all been identified. They're I believe people who were working at Sierra at the time.
Yeah,
and a waiter from one of the local restaurants.
Yeah, exactly. He was the only one who didn't actually work at Sierra, wasn't he?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
And there's a computer, an Apple II off on the side.
Yes. And the hot tub is actually Ken Williams' hot tub, right?
Yeah, exactly. And it's weird because I wrote this fairly early on in my research, the little blurb for this story, but that ad shows up in another magazine this month as well. And that magazine is Softline.
Okay. So Softline magazine debuts this month.
Yes. Now, what may be the first magazine ever dedicated to computer games, Computer Gaming World Issue 1 would be cover dated November-December 1981. But Softline is a magazine published by Online Systems and Soft Talk. Soft Talk, for everybody, is basically the Apple II magazine at this point in time. It's dedicated to that, famous for its very, passionate Apple II is awesome vibe going on. Very community friendly. The magazine is dedicated to both gamers and those that want to be game creators, with a very similar vibe to Soft Talk. The famous river rafting trip organized by Ken Williams with luminaries from Broderbund and many other big software firms of the time is highlighted in this issue.
So I've never heard about the river rafting trip. It sounds like the very first GDC.
You know what? I never thought about it that way, but you're not wrong. Now, I'm not sure if there was only one of these or if it happened multiple times. My interview with Gary Carlson, which I believe is hitting the everybody feed next week, or hit everybody last week. Sorry, we're not doing these in 100% order.
Time traveling again.
Yeah. My Gary Carlson interview, co-founder of Broderbund, he talked about these, just the camaraderie between all of these California-based companies at this point. Because, they were all relatively close to one another. Broderbund just, and I didn't include it, but I think this month the notice came through that they were moving from Oregon down to California. And so all these people know each other. And, they meet up and they see each other at the conventions and stuff. And Jerry Wolosenko, who's big in distribution at this time, he also talked about that. And so it is very much a community thing. I mean, people are checking in with one another and be like, hey, are you doing a racing game right now? Good, because we're doing a racing game. We don't, and stuff like that. These are the types of relationships that exist at this point.
Yeah.
And it's not going to last forever. certain companies like Electronic Arts are going to make sure of that. And the crash is going to wipe out a lot of people.
Yeah.
But the river rafting trip is famous. There's these photos of, Roberta Williams and the Carlsons and stuff, all, in their life vests there and stuff. It's quite a historic moment. It would have been awesome to be a fly on the wall as these guys are all getting ready to do this, just to hear what they're talking about. But
yeah. Only problem is you would have been 4 years old at that point, I think, Carl. So probably wouldn't have understood a lot of it.
I was born in September, so I would have been. No, yeah, this happened before September, so yeah, I would have been 4 years old. I would not have been.
So in other debuts, the Computer Chronicles premieres.
San Francisco UHF station KCSM-TV will premiere a new show all about microcomputing on September 17th. Hosted by Jim Warren and produced by Dave Carlson, not Carlson, the Computer Chronicles would ultimately be spread throughout the country's PBS stations, although Warren would be replaced starting in 1983 with Stuart Chaffet. I think it's Chaffet. No, Chaffet, sorry. Stuart Chaffet, the station's general manager and personal computing enthusiast.
So what would the content of a show like this be? Teaching the viewers, it would be how to program, or just talking about the different computers that you could get or what you could do with them?
Now, exactly what the show looked like in these first 2 years, I do not know. Those episodes are not online. But the Stuart Chaffet episodes are.
Yeah.
And they are phenomenal. If you've never watched Computer Chronicles, most of it's up on YouTube.
Yeah.
And it's absolutely phenomenal. Yeah. Because they were like a news show and like a news magazine for computer geeks. So they'd be talking about the latest machines coming out or trends in computing. They'd have a little segment with just, the headlines, and they would bring on all the people. Like there's a great episode from 1985 where they're introducing both the Atari ST and the Amiga. And so first they bring in Atari. I can't remember what order. They bring in some guys from Commodore to introduce the Amiga and show it off. And they also have Jack Tramiel, who had just been relatively recently fired from Commodore and comes in with the Jackintosh, the Atari ST, to show it off. And it's just Jack being Jack. He's like, it's all about computers for the masses, not the classes and stuff. And it's just absolutely brilliant to see all these people from these big companies and stuff presenting their new products and talking to Chaffet and his co-host for a huge chunk of the series. Blanking on his name right now, but he was the founder of Digital Research, the guy who did CPM. CPM operating system. And until, of course, he tragically passed away. But
I think I've actually read about this before. Now that you say that the guy behind CPM was there as well.
Yeah. And the show ran until 2002. They only stopped doing it because basically the internet caught up with them. But it's great. It's like a time capsule of what computing looked like.
So in Denmark, we had a show that started in '89, pretty much like this. It would be reviewing games and sci-fi movies and sci-fi books and stuff like that, but mainly computer games and computer graphics. I remember the Amiga years. There'd be Amiga demos being shown and
cool.
All sorts. And that's actually still running today. I haven't watched it in 10, 15 years, but it's actually still running from '89 until today. Yeah.
Oh, that's awesome. Yeah, these guys did very, very little with games. I mean, like once a year, they'd maybe have a segment about games.
Yeah.
It was mainly the hardcore stuff, but the games. Next week we'll be talking about game TV shows as those start to proliferate. But unfortunately, I never really had access to any of those TV shows about games. Wherever I happened to live at that time, there was nothing. It's like I lived in Argentina. We didn't have anything like that. Then I got to Germany, and I left right before they started that kind of stuff and got to the States just after they had killed all of those shows. It was weird. It was very weird. But
luck. Yeah.
Yeah, it's just luck of the draw. So I missed out on, like, the UK people are always talking about Game Master and stuff.
Yeah, exactly.
And Bad Influence. And yeah, never got to watch in real time any shows like that. But the closest I got was the occasional episode of the Computer Chronicles. I think it came on like Saturdays on PBS or something. So occasionally I'd catch it, and it was always good.
Yeah. So for a final piece of news for tonight is this little thing from Time Magazine. Time Magazine profiles the People's Court.
Yeah, and this has nothing to do with computers, but it's one of my favorite shows of all time. So I thought I'd mention it just briefly. It's the lawyer in me. So, an innovative new show that brings the drama of small claims court to the small screen gets a write-up in Time Magazine. The show will go on to be one of the best pieces of television ever made and subsequently copycatted and run into the ground.
So one of the best pieces of television ever made, that's you writing that? I've never heard of anything like this, I think.
The People's Court, it's and we don't have to go too deep into it, but it's a television show where what they do is they approach people who have an actual case in front of a small claims court.
Okay.
So that's, up to a certain amount of value. And in California, small claims court, no lawyers are allowed. The judge takes on sort of a slightly advisory role, asking everybody questions and stuff, trying to figure out what happened and then making a decision on a case. And what they do is they say, hey, listen, if you guys come on our show, we have this judge. He's a retired, real judge, but he's retired. He's going to basically perform this as if you were in a real courtroom. He's going to do everything by the book, and you will have a decision. We're going to film it all. And the benefit for you is, number one, you don't have to wait to finally get your court date, which sometimes can take a very long time. And second, no matter who wins, the show will pay the costs.
Ah, okay.
So
I can see why people would accept that then.
Exactly. And the show ran for forever. It was one of those 5 days a week shows. It was 30 minutes. Almost every episode was two cases that they would do. They'd cut them down to like 15 minutes to the relevant elements. But the original show with Judge Wapner was amazing because he would actually explain the law. It was done super serious. A lot of people made fun of it because it was one of the first reality TV shows in that sense. Yeah. That, you'd see these people, getting upset or, screaming and hollering. It happens so seldom. It was really just, these were everyday people with everyday problems. And the judge would explain, why the law requires him to do X, Y, and Z. It was extremely educational. It was one of the shows that set me on the path of becoming a lawyer. And I just thought it was cool that there was this write-up about it here. And I thought, you know what? It's my show. I can do this. Fuck it. It's in.
Okay. Well, it's your show, mate. So if you want to include it, of course. Yeah.
Well, have you ever seen the movie Rain Man?
I have. Yes.
Yeah. Remember, there's that scene where they're driving through the countryside. There's nothing there, and then suddenly Dustin Hoffman's character, the Rain Man's like, he has to watch he has to watch this TV show that comes on at 3:30. That's the People's Court. And he keeps giving the tagline, the cases are real, the plaintiffs, the people are real, and stuff. And he just keeps repeating it over and over again because he needs to watch the People's Court every day. And that's how pervasive or how all-encompassing, and everybody knew this show. And there's been 1,000 other copycat shows that were tried to do up the drama and just threw the law out, basically 9 times out of 10. And there's been a couple of people who replaced Judge Wapner over the years who were also trying to be more dramatic and flowery, and no, they all suck. So
yeah, but you know who would be sad that you chose this story to end off with?
Peter.
Yes, because this is not a company dying.
I know. But this is so early in the business. Companies aren't dying yet.
You'll have a field day when you get a few years ahead of this.
Yeah, right now we're still in the phase. It's like, we're 5 minutes after the Big Bang, and the different suns are being born, and it's all new and exciting. Just wait 2 more years and everything will come crashing down. I promise.
Sounds good.
Okay. Mads, we have come, like you said, to the end of our voyage. What is the word of the day?
Oh, the word of the day. So I haven't thought about this at all, but it has to be revenue.
Revenue. Excellent. Yes. Excellent. We're in the boom phase. Yes. Everything's about increasing revenue.
Exactly.
Good choice. Okay. Mads, where can people find you?
People can find me here in Denmark in my apartment. No, they can find me on the Retro Asylum podcast, where I talk about old games, and they can find me on the Playthrough podcast, where I talk about, new and middle-aged games, I think you'd call it. So, those 2 podcasts. And on the Retro Asylum Discord is probably where I'm most active. So if you want to chat with me, go find me there.
Awesome. And remember, everybody, you can find links to all the topics we talked about and all of our sources in the show notes below. And, of course, if you like what we're doing here, join us on Patreon, just $1 a month. You can get to watch the video versions of the 7 Minutes in Heaven, where we're talking as the co-host blunders through a game. And you will also get 3-month early access to all of our interview episodes. Mads, as always, it has been a pleasure. Thank you, and farewell.
Pleasure was all mine, mate.
Awesome.
Bye.